Hi, everybody. My name is Ann, and welcome to A for AI. Today, I'm talking to you a little bit around the implications of AI, risks and opportunities for information accessibility. I am the director of the FairTech Institute over at Access Partnership, and welcome to this session. I think that the idea of risks and opportunities for information accessibility really depends on which perspective, whose perspective you're looking at from, right? There is usually a slight semantic divide. For example, when you say privacy, or I want my privacy to be protected, well, you may be a really private person and maybe you don't really want a lot of your information shared, but maybe to me, I'm not so private. I'm actually okay with some information being shared. And this could be the reason behind perhaps personalities, or it could be because there are different cultural reasons behind your understanding of what privacy is and what my understanding of privacy is. And I find that the most useful way of trying to unpack this idea of risks and opportunities for information accessibility is to start first from a stakeholder perspective. Whose risk and opportunity are we talking about? And you'll see that I have 5 bubbles on the screen right now. And I promise you, this is the only slide that I have actually. There are 5 bubbles which represent 5 different stakeholders, which I like to think through as I think through any risk and opportunity. The first is the government and the public sector. This is usually the stakeholder group that has citizens at heart. Mind you, I'm not saying like general people, but they're thinking of in terms of citizens because that is their audience. So they have a perspective to take, they have a philosophy to approach things from, and that is from the public good usually. So that is one important stakeholder. The second stakeholder is the private sector, and we've heard a lot about them around implications of artificial intelligence, so I won't really go too much into them, but they are a really important sector that we need to look at it from. The third is the technical community, and these are the guys and the girls who are actually building the AI systems, and a lot of times there are really specific risks and opportunities which we don't know about because we're not really actually part of building the system. So I think that they're really important community to be engaging with as well. The fourth is civil society, and these are usually you have a community of people, or you have a community of a tribe, for example, a group of individuals who share the same vision for something, and you are advocating for something. So that's civil society. And of course, the fifth bubble, you have academia, which are thinking about things from a academic lens, as well as usually a historical lens as well, because they're looking at what came from before and what we're looking to moving towards. So when it comes to risks and opportunities for information accessibility, I think an important thing to do is not to assume that everybody knows the same thing and are using the words the same way, but to really come to it from a stakeholder perspective and ask ourselves, whose risk and opportunity are we speaking of in the first instance? You'll also see that I have 4 columns that in the slide deck right now, and I think that there are 4 main questions that we can ask in order to further unpack risks and opportunities. So you'll notice that I'm not actually giving you some solutions, but I'm actually thinking through some of the questions and really asking ourselves, how do we ask the questions that will give us the answer to what exactly are the risks and opportunities for information accessibility when it comes to artificial intelligence? Now, the first bucket that I have is if you are looking at information accessibility, is there data in the first instance? So who is, if you're representing a group, is your group in the first instance represented? Do you have data to be counted? Are you standing up and being counted, or are you underrepresented in the data? I think that's a really important part of asking ourselves, if information is meant to be accessible, do we have data for certain groups of people? So we ask ourselves that. Second question that we want to be asking is who is collecting it? We're going to be asking ourselves, what kind of data is being collected? Is it fair? And how is it being extracted? What is being extracted? What kind of data is being extracted from the data? And what is its bias? And I think that this is going to be controversial to state, but I believe that all data sets are going to be biased in some form or fashion. It's just the degree to which it is biased. So we need to ask ourselves, what exactly is bias? What exactly is its bias when we're looking at the data? And then we ask ourselves, what is it missing, possibly. And this is a little bit uncomfortable and a little bit hard to do because we're actually putting ourselves outside of ourselves and actually asking ourselves what exactly is missing. And you don't know what you don't know, right? So it becomes a little bit tricky. But I think that we should be aware and asking ourselves these questions because it makes us question the data a little bit more, question the idea of this information is accessible, this information is not accessible, why, and how can we make it a little bit more accessible? Which brings us to the next question. Can I access it? We've covered the idea of is there data in the first instance already, but perhaps the next step that we want to be taking is there publicly available data, or is it paywalled, or is it blocked in some form or fashion, or is it only available to certain types of communities? And is that inverted commas, is that fair? Or is that sensible to take as a policy for information accessibility? Is it in usable format? And this is really important because I find that in many instances, a lot of people want to use certain types of data. And I'll give you an example, really, really easily. I think a lot of information is put online in PDF files, but sometimes it's quite hard to do machine translation if they're PDF files. So if that is this is just one of the more common ways I feel data is not in a 100% usable, user-friendly format, especially for people in less technically able societies, for example. So we need to ask ourselves, is that data set, is that database in a usable format? And as a converse to that, we need to ask ourselves also, is it too accessible? Are there no safeguards? And then we're going to ask ourselves, maybe you want to put some safeguards there in terms of disallowing certain bad actors from getting access to it. And finally, in the second bucket of can I access it, is it too complex to access, perhaps too technically complex to access, or is it too technically complex to even understand what exactly you're accessing? And I think that that's the second part of the questions that we have to be asking when it comes to information accessibility. The third question is, can I trust it? Can I verify it? And I think that that is a bucket that has been done and explored many, many times already over the years because it really moves and is overlapping with the data privacy discussions and data protection discussions. But let me just run through it so that we can understand it. So yes, there is data, and we ask ourselves, is it accurate? Has it been adjusted, or has it acknowledged its biases? Was it ethically collected? Was it ethically being presented? And I'll give you an example. For if you are a researcher and you have collected data and you have collected data ethically, you put it online and you've said, okay, fine, I'm happy to let everybody access it because it's anonymized and nobody can trace back any sort of this personal data, or perhaps it's just metadata and there's no link back to a human being or anything that's identifiable. But there will be biases in it. Have you adjusted for the biases? Have you acknowledged the biases? Have you been transparent about the biases and telling people about the biases and saying that if you use this data set, this tends to be a little bit more XYZ? Have you done that? I think that that's really important for us to be transparent about that data that we're sharing, because I feel if you are not transparent about the data, then it tends to exacerbate and build on problems which already exist. And then in the end, you can't actually see where you went wrong if you're not transparent about that. So we need to ask ourselves all of those questions when it comes to information accessibility. When we access information, was it ethically collected? Who verified the ethicality of the data collection? I'll give you an example again. If I were to be a researcher, and I am a researcher, if I collect data and I write there, I attest to me, May Ann, ethically collecting this data, all consent was gotten from all human beings, and I now declare my transparent biases that I believe exist within this data set, and I put it together on the cover of the data distribution mechanism that I've chosen. Now, your question as somebody who is accessing that data will be, is this sufficient? Is this enough for you to trust the data? So really the question is that, was it ethically collected? And when somebody says it's ethically collected, who verified the ethicality of the data collection? If it's the self-attestation, for example, is that sufficient for you? And perhaps even from a civil society or maybe from a personal perspective, can I make it more trustworthy, the correctability and the right to make sure that data is correct and verifiable is one of the questions. And again, it's been done to death in the GDPRs, so I won't be covering all of that already. And also the last question, can I exit the data set, data privacy issues? So third really big bucket of questions that we should be asking ourselves when it comes to information accessibility. Assessing the risks and opportunities will require you to ask yourself, can I trust it? Can I verify it? And then finally, the last question that we have is, can I share it ethically? And I think that this is going to be really important because I don't think we've actually talked about this too much just yet when it comes to the implications of AI and information accessibility. Information right now, I think, can be and should be and is currently being harnessed as a social good. And this is true for all of the stakeholders that we're looking at. If you've got a mission to be achieved, you want to be using information as a social good, particularly for the government, particularly for companies and businesses who have, for example, ESG requirements. You want to be using the information as a social good. So I think that we should be really looking into things like business open data and ethical APIs. How can we make a better information sharing ecosystem that is going to be used for social good? I think that the discussion has already been started in the public sector because now there is a really big thrust towards making sure that the governments and the public sector work on digital public infrastructure or DPIs. And so I think that we're moving in the right direction when we're asking ourselves, can we share it ethically? But I think that we need to ask this question a little bit louder, and more organizations and more businesses need to be asking it because, again, the idea of information as a social good is going to be really important. And as a corollary to that, we need to now look at tightening up all of the regulations and tightening up all of the technical requirements for example, ethical APIs. But we're going to have to be looking a little bit more into interoperability, the interconnectivity of the databases, and we need to come to it with an international mindedness that when we collect data and when we use data, that this is not a contained data set that isn't going to go out further. I think that the idea of risks and opportunities will have to come back to the idea that you don't really know what people are using the information that you're putting out or that you're sharing for. And therefore, if you take an international mindedness about it, you're going to be assessing the risks and the opportunities from a very macro and micro perspective. And that zooming in and zooming out will allow us to make a lot better decisions. So those are my 4 big questions, my 5 big stakeholder groups that we're talking about when it comes to implications for AI, risks and opportunities for the information accessibility. I really welcome your feedback and your comments on all of this. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to interact with you very soon. My email and my LinkedIn are there. Please feel free to connect with me. Thank you very much for your attention.